The text came in at 9:17 p.m., just as I was settling into my third beer and a rerun of some cop show I'd seen a dozen times before. Working late again, don't wait up, love you. I stared at the screen of my phone, sitting in my cluttered apartment that smelled like leftover pizza and the faint trace of Eliza's expensive perfume from this morning. The place was a monument to organized chaos, tech manuals stacked next to empty beer bottles, computer cables snaking across the hardwood floor like digital vines, and my collection of vintage keyboards gathering dust on every available surface. "Sure, hun," I muttered to the empty room, my voice dripping with the kind of sarcasm that had gotten me through 8 years of marriage and 12 years in IT. "Get that bread." My name is Mark Halverson, and I'm what you might call professionally paranoid. When you spend your days as a systems analyst, digging through code and hunting down security vulnerabilities, you develop a certain appreciation for patterns, anomalies, things that don't quite add up, like your wife claiming to work late for the 4th time this month when her department hasn't had a major project since Christmas. I took another sip of beer and flipped through my phone, not really looking for anything in particular. Just the usual social media wasteland, people posting pictures of their dinner, political rants from college acquaintances I should have unfriended years ago, and the endless stream of humble brags disguised as inspirational quotes. That's when I saw it. Julie Brennan's Instagram story. Julie, Eliza's best friend, and the kind of person who documented every moment of her existence like she was running for office. The timestamp read 9:45 p.m., just 28 minutes after Eliza's text about working late. The video was shaky, clearly taken in some dimly lit bar with too loud music and the kind of trendy, exposed brick walls that charged $15 for a cocktail. Julie was giggling behind the camera, her voice barely audible over the noise. Girls' night is getting spicy. And there, in the VIP booth section that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, was my wife. Eliza Halverson, supposedly buried in spreadsheets and quarterly reports, was instead buried in a passionate embrace with Greg Stanton. Greg Stanton, my boss. The same Greg Stanton who'd been writing my case about team synergy and collaborative excellence, while apparently collaborating with my wife in ways that definitely weren't covered in the employee handbook. I watched the video 3 times, my beer growing warm in my hand. The first time, I felt that familiar punch to the gut that comes with having your worst suspicions confirmed. The second time, I noticed the details. How comfortable they looked together. How this clearly wasn't their first time at this particular dance. The third time, I felt something else entirely. Cold, calculating fury. But here's the thing about being an IT guy. You don't just get angry, you get methodical. You document everything. You build your case with the same attention to detail you'd use to debug a critical system failure. I screenshot the video. Then I screenshot Julie's entire story, making sure to capture the timestamp, the location tag, and every incriminating frame. My phone's camera roll had become a digital evidence locker, and I was just getting started. "Love in the time of hashtags," I said to my empty apartment. How romantic. I opened my laptop, a custom-built machine that could probably hack into a small government if I was so inclined, and began organizing the files. Mark Halverson, systems analyst, was about to become Mark Halverson, digital detective, and unlike the cops on TV, I wasn't going to need a warrant. The apartment felt different now, like the air itself had changed composition. The framed wedding photos on the mantel seemed to mock me with their frozen smiles and promises that had apparently come with expiration dates. The expensive throw pillows Eliza had insisted we needed were suddenly just overpriced fabric taking up space on furniture I'd probably be keeping in the divorce. But I wasn't thinking about divorce yet. I was thinking about something much more satisfying. I was thinking about revenge. My phone buzzed with another text from Eliza. "Might be really late. This project is a nightmare. Miss you." I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "No worries, take all the time you need." And I meant it. Because while she was busy playing house with Greg Stanton, I was going to be busy playing a different kind of game entirely. The kind where I made the rules, controlled the board, and decided when the game was over. I cracked open another beer and settled in at my computer. It was going to be a long night, but then again, some of the best work gets done after hours. Just ask my wife. The next morning arrived with the kind of gray drizzle that makes mid-sized cities look like they're auditioning for a noir film. I'd been awake since 5, not because I couldn't sleep, but because I'd been busy, very busy. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Eliza had stumbled in around 2 a.m., reeking of expensive cocktails and making just enough noise to wake me up. She'd mumbled something about client dinner running late and collapsed into bed like a woman with a clear conscience. Amazing how easily deception came to her, like she'd been practicing for years. Maybe she had been. I pretended to be asleep as she went through her morning routine. 45 minutes of primping and preening that transformed her from guilty wife into polished HR professional. She kissed my forehead before leaving, a gesture that felt more like a Judas kiss than a loving goodbye. "Have a good day, honey," she whispered, probably thinking she was being sweet. "You too," I mumbled into my pillow, already planning exactly how good my day was going to be. 20 minutes after her car pulled out of the driveway, I was showered, dressed, and sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and my laptop. The evidence folder I'd created the night before had grown considerably. Screenshots, timestamps, location data, and a few other digital breadcrumbs I'd managed to collect through perfectly legal means that I wasn't planning to explain to anyone. The beauty of working in IT is that you understand how digital footprints work. Every photo, every check-in, every credit card transaction leaves a trail. And when you're married to someone, you have access to a surprising amount of shared data. Like our joint credit card statement, which showed several charges at expensive restaurants on nights when Eliza claimed to be working late. Always for two people, always at places that definitely weren't serving the kind of food you'd eat during a working dinner. I opened my work email and began composing what would either be the most satisfying message of my career or the one that got me fired. Possibly both. 2. Ms. Patricia Evans, Human Resources Director. Subject: inappropriate workplace relationship. Immediate attention required priority. Hi, Ms. Evans. I am writing to report a violation of company policy regarding inappropriate relationships between supervisors and subordinates, as outlined in Section 4.2 of the Employee Handbook. I have documented evidence of a romantic relationship between Greg Stanton, VP of Operations, and Eliza Halverson, HR Specialist, which represents a clear conflict of interest and potential liability for the company. Attached, please find photographic evidence, including timestamps and location data, documenting this relationship. I am prepared to provide additional documentation as needed. I trust this matter will be handled with the discretion and thoroughness that such situations require. Respectfully, Mark Halverson, Senior Systems Analyst. I attached the screenshots, triple-checked the email for typos, and hovered my cursor over the send button. This was it. The first domino in what I hoped would be a very satisfying chain reaction. I clicked send. The email disappeared into the digital ether, carrying with it 8 years of marriage and whatever was left of my faith in the people closest to me. But instead of regret, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Control. For the first time since I'd started suspecting Eliza's late nights weren't about spreadsheets, I was the one making the moves instead of just reacting to them. It felt better than I'd expected. I finished my coffee, grabbed my laptop bag, and headed for the office. Today was going to be interesting. The drive to work usually took 25 minutes through surface streets lined with the kind of mid-sized city architecture that couldn't decide if it wanted to be quaint or modern. Strip malls next to historic buildings, craft breweries sharing parking lots with chain restaurants. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, which was about to work very much in my favor. Our office building was one of those glass and steel monuments to corporate optimism, all open floor plans and collaborative spaces designed by people who'd never actually had to work in them. The lobby featured motivational posters about synergy and innovation, while the reality upstairs involved a lot of people pretending to be busy while actually scrolling through social media. I badged in at 8:47 a.m., just early enough to look dedicated, but not so early as to seem overeager. The elevator ride to the 4th floor gave me time to check my phone. No missed calls from Greg, no frantic texts from Eliza. The calm before the storm. The IT department occupied a corner of the floor that felt like a different planet from the rest of the office. While marketing had their inspirational quotes and sales had their achievement boards, we had server racks, multiple monitors, and the blessed sound of humming machines that never lied, cheated, or claimed to be working late when they were actually out getting drinks with someone else's spouse. "Morning, Mark," called Omar Rodriguez from his desk near the window. Omar was the closest thing I had to a real friend at work, a network security specialist with a talent for finding things that people thought they'd hidden. "You look like someone who had an interesting evening." "You could say that," I replied, settling into my chair and powering up my workstation. "How's your morning been?" "Quiet so far, though I did notice some unusual email traffic to HR about 30 minutes ago. System flagged it as high priority." He raised an eyebrow in my direction. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" I tried to look innocent, which probably failed spectacularly. "Can't imagine what you're talking about." Omar laughed and turned back to his monitors, but I caught him glancing in my direction a few more times over the next hour. He was smart enough to know when something was happening and experienced enough to know when not to ask too many questions. At 10:15 a.m., my phone rang. Greg Stanton's name appeared on the screen, and I felt a smile spread across my face that probably would have scared small children. I let it ring, and ring, and ring. The voicemail notification popped up a few seconds later, but I didn't listen to it. Instead, I turned back to my computer and got to work on what looked like a perfectly normal day of systems analysis and network maintenance. But every few minutes, I found myself glancing toward the elevator bank, waiting for the real show to begin. The call from Greg came again at 11:30, then again at 12:15. Each time, I watched his name light up my screen and felt a warm satisfaction as I declined the call. There's something deeply gratifying about having power over someone who's used to being in control, especially when that someone has been playing house with your wife. By lunchtime, the office gossip network was buzzing with the kind of energy that usually meant someone was getting fired or the coffee machine was broken again. I caught fragments of conversation as I walked to the break room. Whispers about HR meetings and investigations and, "Did you see Greg's face this morning?" I hadn't seen Greg's face, actually. He'd apparently called in sick around 10 a.m., which was interesting timing considering his sudden desire to have urgent phone conversations with me. Eliza, on the other hand, was very much present and accounted for. I spotted her through the glass walls of Conference Room B, sitting across from Ms. Evans and looking like someone who just discovered that her carefully constructed world was developing some serious structural problems. "Rough day for some people," Omar observed, appearing at my elbow with a sandwich and that knowing look he got when he'd been monitoring network traffic. "Word is there's some kind of investigation happening. Something about inappropriate relationships." "Shocking," I said, unwrapping my own lunch. "Who would have thought that kind of thing could happen in a professional environment?" "Right? It's almost like people forget that everything leaves a digital trail these days." He took a bite of his sandwich and studied me carefully. "Of course, someone would have to be pretty tech-savvy to put together that kind of evidence. And they'd probably want to be really sure about their facts before making any accusations." I nodded thoughtfully. "Hypothetically speaking, if someone were to have that kind of evidence, they'd probably want to make sure it was comprehensive, not just one incident, but a pattern of behavior." "Hypothetically." "Right. Hypothetically, they might want to look at things like credit card statements, location data, maybe even social media activity. Build a timeline that would be hard to dispute." Omar's eyes lit up with the kind of professional appreciation that comes from recognizing quality work. "That would be very thorough, very systematic." "It's all about the documentation," I agreed. We ate our lunch in comfortable silence, watching through the glass walls as Eliza's meeting with HR stretched into its second hour. Her body language was getting more defensive by the minute, and I found myself wondering what story she was trying to sell. Probably something about being the victim, about how she was being falsely accused by a jealous husband who couldn't handle her success. That narrative was about to get a lot more complicated. My phone buzzed with a text from Eliza. "Can we talk tonight? Something's happened at work." I typed back, "Of course. Everything okay?" "I'll explain later. Love you." The casual dishonesty was almost impressive. Even caught red-handed, she was still trying to control the narrative, still playing the role of the devoted wife who just happened to get caught up in some workplace drama that had nothing to do with her choices. But I wasn't done collecting evidence. In fact, I was just getting started. That evening, I suggested we meet some friends for brunch the next day. "You've been working so hard lately," I told Eliza as she paced around our living room like a caged animal. "Maybe some time with Julie and the gang would help you relax." She looked at me like I'd suggested we take a vacation to Mars. "I don't think this is a good time for socializing, Mark. There's some crazy situation at work, and I need to focus on clearing my name." "Clearing your name from what?" "Someone made some ridiculous accusations about me and Greg. Completely false, obviously, but you know how these things can spiral out of control." I nodded sympathetically. "That sounds awful. What kind of accusations?" She waved her hand dismissively. "Office politics. Someone probably saw us having a work dinner and decided to make something out of nothing. You know how people love to gossip." "Right. Work dinner." I pretended to consider this. "Well, maybe brunch would be good for you. Show everyone that you're not letting false rumors get to you. Project confidence." She brightened slightly. "That's actually not a bad idea. Show a united front." "Exactly. I'll text Julie." The next morning found us at Harvest Cafe, one of those trendy brunch spots where they charge $18 for eggs. Benedict and the mimosas flow like water. Julie had claimed a large table near the window, perfect for people watching and being watched. She'd invited her usual crew, Sarah from marketing, Amanda from accounting, and Beth, who worked at the bank and had a talent for making everything sound like a conspiracy theory. Eliza was putting on a good show, laughing at Julie's stories and playing the part of a woman without a care in the world. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept checking her phone, the forced quality of her smiles. "So," Julie said, leaning forward with the kind of gleeful expression that meant she was about to drop some gossip. "What's this I hear about some drama at your office? Sarah said there are rumors flying around about inappropriate relationships." "Oh, that," Eliza said with a dismissive laugh. "Just some troublemaker trying to stir up problems. You know how it is in corporate environments. Someone always has to create drama." "But what kind of accusations?" Amanda pressed. "I mean, inappropriate relationships could mean anything." Eliza glanced at me, probably hoping I'd change the subject. Instead, I smiled encouragingly. "Go ahead, honey. I'm sure your friends want to support you through this difficult time." "Well," she said carefully, "someone apparently thinks I'm having some kind of affair with my boss, which is completely ridiculous, obviously." "Obviously," I agreed. "I mean, you've been working so many late nights lately, spending so much time on that big project. When would you even have time for an affair?" The table went quiet for a moment, and I could practically see the wheels turning in everyone's heads. These women had known Eliza for years. They'd heard her complain about work, seen her social media posts, been part of countless conversations about her marriage. "Speaking of working late," I continued, pulling out my phone, "I've been meaning to ask you about something. I was looking at our bank statements last week, trying to reconcile our vacation fund, and I noticed some interesting charges." Eliza's face went pale. "Mark, maybe this isn't the time." No, it's fine," I said, opening the banking app on my phone. "I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable explanation. It's just that there are all these charges at expensive restaurants on nights when you said you were working late. Always for two people, always at places that seem a little fancy for business dinners." I turned the phone screen toward the table, showing the credit card statement I'd screenshot earlier. The charges were highlighted in yellow: Chez Laurent, 180, the Metropolitan Grill, 240, Vintage Wine Bar, 195. "And then there's this interesting pattern," I continued, swiping to show another screenshot. "These charges always seem to correspond with your working late texts. Like this one from last Tuesday, you texted me at 9 p.m. saying you were stuck at the office, but our credit card was charged at Vintage Wine Bar at 9:30. The silence at the table was deafening. Julie's mouth was hanging open slightly, and Sarah was staring at Eliza like she'd never seen her before. "Mark," Eliza said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic, "you're embarrassing me." "Am I? I'm just trying to understand why our vacation fund is mysteriously short $3,000, and why you've been so secretive about your work dinners." I swiped to another screenshot. "Oh, and there's this charge at Tiffany & Co. for $800. That's interesting, because I don't remember you buying any jewelry lately." Beth, the bank employee, leaned forward to get a better look at the phone screen. "Wait, is that a men's watch? The item description says men's silver chronograph." "Huh?" I said, pretending to be surprised. "You're right. Eliza, care to explain why you bought an expensive men's watch with our vacation money? Early anniversary gift, maybe?" Eliza stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I don't have to sit here and be interrogated like some kind of criminal." "Of course not," I said mildly. "I'm just asking questions. The same kind of questions HR is probably asking right about now." She grabbed her purse and stormed toward the exit, leaving behind a table of stunned friends and a half-eaten plate of French toast. The silence stretched for several long moments before Julie finally spoke. "Holy crap, Mark. Is she really having an affair with her boss? Using our joint account to buy him expensive gifts? Lying to me for months?" I shrugged and took a sip of my mimosa. "The evidence seems to suggest that, yes?" Amanda shook her head slowly. "I can't believe it. I mean, I know marriages have problems, but this is methodical," Beth finished. "This isn't just cheating. This is planning. Strategy." "Yeah," I agreed. "It really is." I left cash on the table to cover the bill and stood up. "Ladies, it's been enlightening. Julie, you might want to be careful about what you post on social media. Sometimes people screenshot things." Julie's face went white as she realized her Instagram story had been the smoking gun that started this whole investigation. As I walked to my car, I could see Eliza through the restaurant window, pacing back and forth on the sidewalk while talking frantically on her phone, probably calling Greg or maybe her lawyer. Either way, the second phase of my plan was complete. Her friends knew. Her support network was crumbling, and we hadn't even gotten to the good part yet. Monday morning brought the kind of crisp autumn air that makes you believe in fresh starts and new possibilities. I arrived at the office early, partly because I was curious to see how the weekend's revelations had affected the corporate ecosystem, and partly because I wanted to be settled in before the inevitable confrontation with Greg. He didn't disappoint. I'd barely finished my first cup of coffee when he appeared at my desk like a storm cloud in an expensive suit. Greg Stanton had always been the kind of man who believed his own marketing materials, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of confident smile that worked great in boardrooms and apparently in hotel bars. Today, however, he looked like someone who'd spent the weekend discovering that his carefully constructed world had some serious security vulnerabilities. "Halverson," he said, his voice carrying just enough volume to attract attention from the nearby cubicles. "Conference room, now." I glanced around at my coworkers, most of whom were suddenly very interested in their computer screens. "Good morning to you too, Greg. Beautiful day, isn't it?" His jaw tightened. "Conference room, now." I saved my work, grabbed my coffee mug, and followed him toward the glass-walled meeting spaces that lined the eastern side of our floor. He chose Conference Room C, the one with frosted glass that provided privacy while still allowing shadows and silhouettes to be visible from outside. Smart choice for a man who probably didn't want witnesses to whatever conversation we were about to have. He closed the door and turned to face me, his corporate-friendly mask finally slipping enough to reveal the anger underneath. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I settled into one of the ergonomic chairs and took a sip of coffee. "I'm having a meeting with my supervisor. You called the meeting, remember?" "Don't play games with me, Mark. You know exactly what I'm talking about." "Do I? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're the one who's been playing games. With my wife, on my credit card." The color drained from his face, and for a moment I thought he might actually try to deny it. Instead, he sat down across from me and leaned forward, switching to what I recognized as his reasonable authority figure voice. "Look, Mark, I know this situation is complicated." "Complicated?" I interrupted. "That's an interesting word choice. I would have gone with adultery, or maybe betrayal, but complicated works too." He held up his hands in a gesture that was probably meant to be calming. "What happened between Eliza and me? It wasn't planned. These things just develop sometimes. Adult relationships are complex." "Adult relationships?" I repeated slowly. "Is that what we're calling it? Because from the outside, it looks more like a married woman and her boss sneaking around behind her husband's back while using his money to fund their romance." Greg's reasonable mask slipped a little further. "She's not happy, Mark. She hasn't been happy for a long time. Sometimes people find connection where they least expect it." I had to admire his technique. Blame the victim, minimize the betrayal, make it sound like some kind of cosmic inevitability rather than a series of deliberate choices. He'd probably used this same approach in business negotiations for years. "You're right," I said, nodding thoughtfully. "She hasn't seemed happy lately. All those late nights at work, all that stress about projects that never seemed to exist. It must have been exhausting, maintaining that level of deception." "It wasn't supposed to happen this way," he said, and for the first time he sounded almost sincere. "Neither of us wanted to hurt you." "But you did it anyway." "Yes." "For months." "Yes." "While lying to my face every day at work?" He didn't answer that one, which was answer enough. I leaned back in my chair and studied him. Up close, without the benefit of dim bar lighting and expensive cocktails, Greg Stanton looked older than his 42 years. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of stress and sleepless nights, and his usually perfect hair showed traces of gray that his stylist hadn't quite managed to hide. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Do you and Eliza ride off into the sunset together? Live happily ever after on your combined salaries and my vacation fund?" We haven't discussed the future in detail." "Ah." I nodded as if this made perfect sense. "So you've been willing to risk your career, your reputation, and your marriage for someone you haven't even bothered to make future plans with. That's either very romantic or very stupid." His face flushed red. "You don't understand the situation." "I understand it perfectly. You're a middle-aged executive having a midlife crisis with a younger employee. She's an ambitious woman who thinks sleeping with her boss might advance her career. It's the oldest story in corporate America." "It's not like that," he snapped, finally losing his composure entirely. "What Eliza and I have is real. It's not some cheap office affair." "Really? Because the credit card statements suggest otherwise. Expensive dinners, hotel charges, jewelry purchases. It looks exactly like a cheap office affair, just an expensive one." Greg stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward into the wall. "You need to drop this, Mark. Whatever evidence you think you have, whatever game you think you're playing, it needs to stop. Now." I remained seated, looking up at him with what I hoped was an expression of mild curiosity. Or what? Or you'll regret it. Is that a threat, Greg? Because if it is, I should probably mention that this conference room has security cameras, audio and video. Everything we've said in the last 10 minutes is being recorded. He glanced up at the small black dome in the corner of the ceiling, his face going pale as he realized he'd just confessed to an affair and threatened an employee on company surveillance equipment. You son of a... Careful, I warned, still speaking in that same mild tone. Remember the cameras. He stared at me for a long moment, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Then he turned and walked out of the conference room, leaving the door open behind him. I finished my coffee and returned to my desk, where Omar was waiting with an expression of barely contained excitement. Please tell me you got him to confess on camera, he said quietly. I got him to confess on camera. Outstanding. What's phase 3? Patience, I said, settling back into my chair. Good revenge is like good code. You build it layer by layer, test each component, and make sure there are no bugs before you deploy. And if he tries to retaliate? I smiled and opened my email. Then he's going to discover that threatening the person who manages the company's IT security was probably not his smartest career move. The rest of the day passed quietly, but I could feel the tension building throughout the office like atmospheric pressure before a storm. Greg avoided the IT department entirely, which was probably wise. Eliza called in sick, which was less wise but understandable. And Ms. Evans from HR spent most of the afternoon in meetings with people whose names I didn't recognize but whose expensive suits suggested they weren't from our local office. At 6 p.m., as I was packing up my laptop, my phone buzzed with a text from Greg. Parking garage, level B2. We need to finish our conversation. I stared at the message for a moment, then showed it to Omar. That's not ominous at all, he said. Want backup? Nah. But if I'm not back in an hour, check the security footage. Will do. And Mark, be careful. Desperate people do stupid things. The parking garage beneath our building was one of those concrete caverns that looked like the set of every crime thriller ever made. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows between the rows of cars, and the air smelled of exhaust fumes and industrial cleaning products. I found Greg waiting by my car on level B2, leaning against the concrete wall with his arms crossed. He'd loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, trying to project an image of casual authority. Instead, he just looked tired and desperate. You came, he said as I approached. You asked nicely. I stopped about 10 feet away, close enough to talk, but far enough to run, if necessary. What's on your mind, Greg? I want you to drop this, all of it. The HR complaint, the investigation, whatever evidence you think you have. Just walk away. And why would I do that? Because I can make your life very difficult if you don't. I laughed, which clearly wasn't the reaction he'd been expecting. More difficult than discovering my wife is cheating on me with my boss? More difficult than finding out they've been using my money to fund their affair? I'm curious what you think you could do to make my situation worse. I can fire you. On what grounds? I haven't violated any company policies. I haven't done anything illegal. I reported a legitimate HR concern through proper channels. I'll find grounds. Good luck with that. You'll need to explain to a lot of people why you're retaliating against an employee who reported your ethics violation. That should be a fun conversation with corporate. Greg pushed himself away from the wall and took a step toward me. You think you're so smart, don't you? Sitting there with your computers and your evidence, playing detective. But you don't understand how the real world works. Enlighten me. The real world is about power, about who has it and who doesn't. And right now, I have it. You don't. Interesting theory. But here's the thing about power, Greg. It's only as good as the foundation it's built on. And your foundation just developed some serious cracks. He took another step closer, and I could see the desperation in his eyes. This was a man who'd built his identity around being in control, and that control was slipping away one screenshot at a time. Last chance, Mark. Drop it, or I'll destroy you. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recorder app, making sure he could see what I was doing. Could you repeat that? I want to make sure I get the exact wording for my lawyer. That's when he snapped. Greg lunged forward, grabbing for my phone with one hand and reaching for my throat with the other. But here's the thing about spending most of your life behind a desk. It makes you think everyone else is as out of shape as you are. I sidestepped his clumsy attack, and he stumbled past me, his momentum carrying him straight into the side of my car. The impact set off the car alarm, and suddenly the parking garage was filled with the sound of honking horns and flashing lights. Greg bounced off the car and spun around to face me, his face red with anger and embarrassment. You little... I'd be very careful about your next words, I said, holding up my phone to show that it was still recording. Assault and battery charges tend to stick, especially when there's audio evidence. He stared at me for a long moment, breathing heavily, his expensive suit rumpled and his perfect hair disheveled. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing off the concrete walls as he disappeared into the maze of parked cars. I turned off my car alarm and leaned against the driver's door, my heart pounding with adrenaline and satisfaction. Phase 3 was complete, and it had gone even better than I'd hoped. Greg Stanton had just threatened and attempted to assault an employee in a parking garage, on audio recording, after confessing to an affair on security camera. Some people, I reflected, really don't understand how evidence works. The beauty of having friends in IT is that they understand the importance of documentation. Omar was waiting in my apartment when I got home, sitting at my kitchen table with his laptop open and an expression that suggested Christmas had come early. "Please tell me you got the parking garage incident on audio," he said before I'd even closed the door. I held up my phone. Every word, including the part where he threatened to destroy me and then tried to grab my throat. "Outstanding. And I have some presents for you, too." He gestured to his laptop screen, which showed what appeared to be a detailed timeline with timestamps, locations, and credit card transactions. "I may have done some completely legal research into publicly available information about your wife's recent activities." I poured myself a beer and sat down across from him. Define completely legal. Nothing that wouldn't hold up in court. Social media posts, location data from photos, cross-referenced with the credit card statements you already had access to, just connecting dots that were already there. The timeline was impressive. Omar had managed to piece together a comprehensive picture of Eliza and Greg's affair going back almost 6 months. Restaurant visits, hotel stays, shopping trips, even a weekend getaway to a resort 2 hours away that Eliza had claimed was a girls' spa trip with Julie. "This is thorough," I said, scrolling through the data. Almost obsessively thorough. I was motivated. Plus, your wife wasn't very careful about her digital footprint. She posted Instagram stories from half these locations. And Greg? More careful, but not careful enough. His credit card was used at the same locations, same times. Either they're having an affair, or they're the world's most dedicated dining companions. I studied the timeline, feeling that familiar surge of cold anger. The scope of the deception was breathtaking. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a brief lapse in judgment. This was a sustained campaign of lies that had required planning, coordination, and a complete disregard for our marriage. "There's more," Omar said, opening another window on his laptop. I did some digging into Greg's background. Turns out this isn't his first workplace romance. He had a similar situation at his last company. Married man, affair with a subordinate, ended badly when the woman's husband found out. How badly? Badly enough that Greg had to leave the company. No criminal charges, but there was a settlement. Confidential, but I found references to it in some legal databases. I leaned back in my chair, processing this information. Greg wasn't just a cheating husband. He was a serial predator who used his position of authority to manipulate younger employees. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. "So what's the plan?" Omar asked. "Because I'm assuming you have a plan." "I do, but first I need to make a phone call." I pulled out my personal phone and dialed a number I'd found in Greg's employee file. It rang 3 times before a woman's voice answered. "Hello? Is this Mrs. Stanton, Greg Stanton's wife?" There was a pause. "Yes. Who is this?" "My name is Mark Halverson. I work with your husband. I'm sorry to bother you, but I think there's something you should know." Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice was carefully controlled. "What kind of something?" "The kind that involves your husband and my wife, and hotel receipts, and jewelry purchases that didn't come home to you." The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Then, "Can you prove it?" "Yes, ma'am, I can." "I'll be right over." She hung up before I could give her my address, but something told me she'd find it. Margaret Stanton arrived 45 minutes later, driving a silver Mercedes that probably cost more than my annual salary. She was older than I'd expected, maybe 50, with the kind of understated elegance that comes from years of country club memberships and charity galas. But her eyes were hard as diamonds, and her handshake could have crushed walnuts. "Show me," she said without preamble. Omar and I spread out the evidence like prosecutors preparing for trial. Credit card statements, photographs, social media posts, hotel receipts, the timeline of their affair, and the audio recording from the parking garage. Margaret examined each piece with the methodical attention of someone who'd been expecting this conversation for a long time. "How long have you known?" she asked finally. "Suspected for about a month? Confirmed for a week?" "And you're certain it's not just a business relationship?" I showed her the Instagram video of them making out in the bar booth. "Does this look like business to you?" She studied the video for a long moment, her expression never changing. "No, it doesn't." "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. "I know this isn't easy to hear." "Easy?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Mr. Halverson, this is the third time I've had this conversation. The first 2 times, I chose to look the other way. I won't be making that mistake again." She gathered up copies of the evidence and stood up. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention. You should expect to hear from my attorney within the next few days. Not about you," she added quickly, seeing my expression. "About the divorce proceedings. You may be called as a witness." "I'd be happy to testify." "Good. And Mr. Halverson, your wife isn't the victim in this situation, but she's not the only villain either. My husband is very good at making women believe they're special, that they're different from all the others. She probably thinks she's in love with him. Does that excuse what she did? No, but it might explain it." She headed toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I think your approach has been very measured, very professional. Some men would have handled this differently." After she left, Omar and I sat in my kitchen, drinking beer and contemplating the wreckage of 2 marriages. "Think she'll really divorce him?" Omar asked. "Oh, she'll divorce him. The question is how much of his assets she'll walk away with." "And Eliza?" I pulled out my phone and opened a new text message. "Eliza is about to discover that her support network isn't as solid as she thought." I scrolled through my contacts and started typing. "Hi, Julie. It's Mark. I wanted to thank you for posting that Instagram story last week. Without it, I never would have known about Eliza and Greg. I'm sure you didn't mean to expose their affair, but I'm grateful that you did. I thought you should know that I've shared the video with HR, Greg's wife, and my lawyer. Thanks again for being such a good friend." I sent similar messages to Sarah, Amanda, Beth, and every other member of Eliza's social circle who'd been at brunch. Each message was polite, grateful, and carefully crafted to make them realize they'd been complicit in documenting and enabling the affair. Within an hour, my phone started buzzing with responses. Panicked texts from Julie, defensive messages from Sarah, and a long voicemail from Amanda explaining that she'd had no idea what was really going on. But the most interesting response came from Beth, the bank employee. "Mark, I've been thinking about what happened at brunch. I pulled some records, completely legal, don't worry, and I think you should know that Eliza opened a separate checking account 3 months ago. She's been moving money from your joint account in small amounts. Not enough to trigger any alerts, but it adds up. Thought you should know." B. I showed the message to Omar, who whistled low. She's been planning her exit strategy. This wasn't just an affair, it was a financial heist. Looks that way. So what's next? I opened my laptop and began typing a new email to Ms. Evans in HR. Next, I provide a comprehensive update on my original complaint, including evidence of financial fraud, witness statements, and audio recordings of threats made by Mr. Stanton. And then, I smiled and cracked open another beer. Then we wait for the dominoes to fall. The call came on Thursday morning at 6:47 a.m. Eliza's voice was shaky, desperate, nothing like the confident HR professional who'd kissed my forehead goodbye just 2 weeks earlier. "Mark, we need to talk. All of us. You, me, Greg. We need to figure this out before it gets any worse." I was already awake, sitting at my kitchen table with coffee and the morning news. The local business journal had run a small item about personnel changes at our company, carefully worded but clear enough for anyone who knew how to read between the lines. "Worse than what?" I asked. "Worse than adultery? Worse than embezzlement? Worse than your boyfriend threatening to assault me in a parking garage? Please, Mark, just please, meet us tonight. 7 o'clock. The old Riverside Warehouse District, Building 47. You know the place?" I did know the place. Building 47 was part of an abandoned industrial complex on the east side of town, the kind of location where developers made grand plans that never materialized and urban explorers took Instagram photos. It had been empty for 3 years, ever since the manufacturing company that owned it went bankrupt. Why there? Because we need privacy. No cameras, no witnesses, no HR departments, just the 3 of us, talking like adults. "Adults," I repeated. Interesting choice of words, considering the circumstances. 7 o'clock, Mark? Please. She hung up before I could respond, leaving me staring at my phone and wondering what kind of endgame they thought they were playing. I called Omar at work. "I need a favor." "Name it." "Can you track my phone tonight? GPS monitoring, maybe set up some kind of check-in system?" "Are you about to do something stupid?" "Probably, but I'm going to do it carefully." "Where and when?" I gave him the details, and he promised to monitor my location remotely. "If you don't check in every 30 minutes, I'm calling the police." Fair enough. The rest of the day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Greg didn't come into the office, which wasn't surprising given that he'd been placed on administrative leave pending the HR investigation. Eliza was also notably absent, probably spending her time coordinating whatever strategy she and Greg had devised for our evening meeting. At 6:30, I drove across town to the warehouse district, a maze of empty buildings and cracked parking lots that looked like the set of a post-apocalyptic movie. Building 47 sat at the end of a deserted street, its windows boarded up and its loading docks sealed with rusted metal doors. But the main entrance was open, and I could see light coming from somewhere inside. I parked 50 yards away and sent Omar a text. Arrived, going in. The interior of the warehouse was a vast open space with concrete floors and exposed steel beams stretching up into shadows. Someone had set up battery-powered work lights in the center of the space, creating a circle of harsh white light surrounded by darkness. It looked like an interrogation scene from a spy movie. Greg and Eliza were waiting for me, standing close together in the light. They'd clearly coordinated their approach. Greg in his expensive suit trying to project authority, Eliza in a black dress that was probably meant to remind me of what I was losing. "You came?" Greg said as I walked into the circle of light. "You asked nicely." I stopped about 10 feet away, the same distance I'd maintained in the parking garage. "What's this about?" "It's about ending this," Eliza said. "All of it. The investigation, the lawyers, the public humiliation. We want to make a deal." "I'm listening." Greg stepped forward, back in his reasonable authority figure mode. "Here's what we're prepared to offer. You withdraw your HR complaint and agree not to testify in any legal proceedings. In exchange, I'll arrange for you to receive a generous severance package and positive references for future employment. And Eliza will agree to an amicable divorce. No contest, 50-50 split of assets, no alimony demands." I looked back and forth between them, noting how they stood together like a united front. "That's it? That's your offer?" "It's a good offer," Eliza said. "Fair to everyone." "Fair," I repeated slowly. "Let me see if I understand this correctly. You want me to pretend that none of this happened, allow you to keep your jobs and your reputations, and walk away with half of the assets that you've been systematically stealing from our joint accounts for months." "I never stole anything," she protested. I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app. "Really?" "Because I have records of transfers from our joint account to a private account that you opened without telling me. Small amounts, but they add up. What would you call that?" "Financial planning." "For what? Your new life with Greg?" She glanced at Greg, and I caught something in that look, a flicker of uncertainty, maybe even doubt. Margaret Stanton had been right. Eliza probably did think she was in love with him, and she probably did think she was special. "What Eliza and I have is real," Greg said, echoing his words from the conference room. "This isn't some casual affair. We're planning a future together." "Are you?" I asked. "Because that's interesting, considering your wife is planning to take you for everything you're worth in the divorce. Margaret was very thorough when she came to see me. She's documented every asset, every account, every investment. She's also hired a very expensive lawyer who specializes in cases involving adultery and financial misconduct." Greg's face went pale. "Margaret came to see you?" "Tuesday night. Lovely woman, very organized. She thanked me for providing evidence of your affair, and she asked me to testify in the divorce proceedings. I said yes, of course." "You had no right?" "I had every right. Just like I had every right to report your ethics violations to HR, and every right to defend myself when you threatened me in a parking garage." Eliza was staring at Greg with a new expression. Not love or admiration, but calculation. She was starting to realize that her knight in shining armor might not be the financial security she'd been counting on. "Here's my counteroffer," I continued. "You both resign from the company immediately. Eliza signs over her half of our house to me as compensation for the money she stole, and both of you disappear from my life permanently." "That's not reasonable," Greg said. "Neither is adultery. Neither is embezzlement. Neither is threatening assault." I pulled out my phone again and played the audio from our parking garage encounter. Greg's voice filled the warehouse. "Last chance, Mark. Drop it, or I'll destroy you." The sound echoed off the concrete walls and steel beams, and in that moment I saw something shift in Eliza's expression. She was hearing her lover, her supposed future, threatening her husband with violence. She was seeing Greg Stanton not as a romantic figure, but as a man who solved problems through intimidation and threats. "You recorded me," Greg said, his voice tight with anger. "I documented evidence of workplace harassment and attempted assault. It seemed like the prudent thing to do." "You son of a—" He lunged forward, just like he had in the parking garage, but this time I was ready. I sidestepped his attack and let his momentum carry him past me into the darkness beyond the work lights. He stumbled, cursed, and spun around to face me. "This is what you chose," I said to Eliza, gesturing toward Greg as he straightened his suit and tried to regain his composure. "A middle-aged man who solves problems with his fists. Very romantic." "Greg, stop," Eliza said, but her voice lacked conviction. She was seeing him clearly for the first time, and she didn't like what she saw. "You want to know what's really going to happen?" I asked, addressing both of them. HR is going to complete their investigation and find evidence of multiple policy violations. Greg will be terminated for cause, which means no severance, no references, and very limited prospects for future employment. Eliza will be terminated as well, because sleeping with your boss is still considered inappropriate even in the 21st century. I started walking in a slow circle around them, staying in the light while they remained frozen in the center. Greg's wife is going to take him for everything he's worth, which will leave him with limited resources to start his new life. Eliza's going to discover that unemployed, divorced men in their 40s aren't quite as attractive as successful executives, and I'm going to walk away from this whole mess with my integrity intact and a really good story to tell at parties. "You think you've won," Greg said, his voice shaking with rage. "You think you're so clever with your recordings and your evidence and your self-righteous attitude, but you haven't won anything. You've just destroyed 4 lives out of spite." 4 lives? I stopped walking and faced him directly. I count 2 lives destroyed by adultery and financial fraud, 1 life damaged by betrayal and lies, and 1 life that's about to get a whole lot better. That's when he really lost control. Greg charged at me with both hands outstretched, aiming for my throat. But anger makes people stupid, and desperation makes them clumsy. I stepped aside at the last second, grabbed his arm, and used his own momentum to send him stumbling into one of the work lights. The light toppled over with a crash of breaking glass and twisted metal, plunging half the warehouse into darkness. Greg went down hard, his expensive suit tearing on the concrete floor. "Greg!" Eliza rushed to help him up, and I could see the genuine concern in her face. Maybe she did care about him, in her own way, or maybe she was just worried about her investment. I pulled out my phone and sent Omar a quick text. "All good. Heading home soon." "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice echoing in the darkness. "You're both going to resign tomorrow morning. Eliza's going to sign over her interest in our house and our joint accounts. And then you're both going to disappear from my life forever." "And if we don't?" Greg asked, struggling to his feet with Eliza's help. I held up my phone, showing the audio recording app that had been running throughout our entire conversation. "Then this recording goes to HR, to the police, to your wife's lawyer, and to every social media platform I can think of. Your choice." They stood there in the broken light, looking at each other with expressions that had nothing to do with love or romance. They looked like what they were, 2 people who'd made a series of terrible decisions and were just beginning to understand the consequences. "You have until tomorrow at noon," I said, walking toward the exit. "After that, all bets are off." I left them standing in the warehouse, surrounded by shadows and broken glass and the wreckage of their carefully constructed deception. As I drove home through the empty streets, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The game was over. I'd won. And tomorrow, I was going to collect my final paycheck. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that makes you believe in justice and second chances. I woke up at my usual time, made coffee, and checked my phone for the messages I knew would be waiting. The first was from Eliza, sent at 3:17 a.m. "I'll sign the papers. I'm sorry, Mark. I'm so sorry." The second was from Omar. "Greg Stanton submitted his resignation effective immediately. Email went out to all staff at 5 a.m. You magnificent bastard." The third was from Ms. Evans in HR. "Mr. Halverson, please report to my office at 9 a.m. We need to discuss the resolution of your complaint." I showered, dressed in my best suit, and drove to work for what I suspected would be the last time as an employee of the company. The office buzzed with the kind of energy that comes with major personnel changes and juicy gossip. Greg's resignation had sent shockwaves through the building, and everyone wanted to know what had really happened. Ms. Evans was waiting in her office with a stack of paperwork and the expression of someone who'd spent the week dealing with a corporate nightmare. She was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and the kind of no-nonsense attitude that made her very good at her job. "Mr. Halverson," she said as I sat down across from her desk, "this has been a very interesting week." "I imagine so." "Mr. Stanton submitted his resignation this morning, citing personal reasons. Mrs. Halverson submitted hers an hour later, also citing personal reasons. I don't suppose you know anything about their sudden desire to pursue other opportunities?" I tried to look innocent, which probably failed spectacularly. "I'm sure they have their reasons." She studied me for a long moment, then opened the top folder on her desk. "Your complaint was very thorough. very well documented, the kind of evidence that makes HR investigations much easier. I believe in being prepared. Yes, I can see that. She pulled out a sheet of paper and slid it across the desk. The company would like to offer you a promotion. Senior Systems Administrator, reporting directly to the CTO. Significant salary increase, better benefits, and your own office. I looked at the offer letter, noting the salary figure that was nearly double my current pay. This is very generous. You've proven yourself to be someone who takes workplace ethics seriously. The company values that kind of integrity. And if I decline? Then you decline. No retaliation, no negative references, no problems. But I'd encourage you to consider it. Good people who do the right thing are hard to find. I folded the letter and put it in my jacket pocket. I'll need some time to think about it. Of course, take all the time you need. I left her office and walked back to my desk, where Omar was waiting with a grin that could have powered the building. Promotion? He asked. Promotion. You going to take it? Probably. But first, I have some personal business to finish. I spent the morning tying up loose ends and transferring my active projects to other team members. At 11:30, I received a text from my lawyer. Papers signed and filed. House is yours. Congratulations. At 11:45, Margaret Stanton called. Mr. Halverson, I wanted to thank you again for your assistance. Then my attorney tells me that the evidence you provided will be very helpful in our proceedings. I'm glad I could help. There's something else. My husband cleaned out his office this morning, and he left something behind. She paused. A resignation letter addressed to you. Would you like me to read it? Please. It says, Mark, you win. I hope you're satisfied with the destruction you've caused. Some victories aren't worth the cost. That's it. I thought about that for a moment. Mrs. Stanton, do you think I was wrong to expose their affair? Wrong? No. You were betrayed by the two people who should have been most loyal to you. You had every right to defend yourself. Even if it destroyed their lives? Mr. Halverson, they destroyed their own lives. You just documented it. At noon exactly, I walked out of the building and into the parking lot where this whole thing had started. The autumn air was crisp and clean, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe properly. My phone buzzed with one final message, from a number I didn't recognize. This isn't over. G? I stared at the text for a moment, then deleted it. Greg Stanton was unemployed, facing a messy divorce, and dealing with the consequences of his own choices. His threats were as empty as his promises had been. I got in my car and drove home to the house that was now entirely mine, to the life that was now entirely under my control. There would be paperwork to sign, legal proceedings to navigate, and a future to rebuild. But for the first time since this nightmare began, that future looked bright. Some people might say I went too far, that I was vindictive, calculating, cruel. They might be right. But when someone betrays you with such methodical precision, when they lie to your face while stealing your money and planning your destruction, you have two choices. You can be a victim, or you can be something else entirely. I chose to be something else. I chose to win. And as I sat in my kitchen that evening, drinking a beer and reading the promotion offer that would change my life, I realized that revenge really is a dish best served cold, with documentation, and a really good lawyer. The final paycheck, as it turned out, wasn't money at all. It was justice.